Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining the Composting 3 Ways workshop with Allegheny Mountain Institute, paired with Augusta Health. We are an educational nonprofit working to cultivate healthy communities through food and education. We strive to meet our mission through a three-pronged approach, which includes an 18-month tuition-free farm and food system fellowship, institutional support for schools and hospitals, and regional networking to build a food system that nourishes our bodies, our environment, and our economy. I'm Sarah Spinner. I'm a community fellow here at AMI, and I will be hosting today's workshop. I'd like to remind you that this workshop will be recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel, so you can go back and reference it whenever. That being said, if you want to turn off your video and not be recorded, you may do that. Also, closed captions are on, so if you want to opt in, just go to the menu bar for Zoom and just click on show subtitles. And also, everyone is currently on mute, so if you have any questions, please utilize the chat box at any time. I'll be monitoring it throughout, so we'll be able to answer those questions after each compost type that we go through. And then also at the very end, we'll have some time dedicated to answering questions. And now I'm going to pass things off to Dylan, my fellow community fellow and wonderful coworker and friend here at the AMI farm at Augusta Health. So yeah, here's Dylan.
Hello. Is it working? Looks like yes. Great. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Dylan Koenig, and we're going to be talking about getting started composting in 3 different ways. I work here at the Allegheny Mountain Institute farm at Augusta Health. We are a 1-acre veggie operation, intensively grown, and we partner with a hospital here in Augusta County, Virginia, where we primarily distribute through hospital programs our fresh food to increase food security and food resilience in this community. And we use compost a lot. We plant pretty much, we amend our beds with compost every time we're prepping a bed for new crops, and we go through quite a bit of compost. It's pretty core to our system. So some of the takeaways I hope everyone gets from this talk is just how to get started composting, either with your home garden, small farm, or if you're just interested in reducing your environmental footprint and want to live an ecological lifestyle. Hope there's some information for you. So let's get started. So this is an overview of what we're going to talk about. What is compost? Why is composting important? And then we're going to go into how to compost in 3 different ways, using a hot compost system, worm composting, or commercial or municipal composting. And then we're going to figure out how to choose the right method for you and your context and your needs, and then some Q&A. And before we get into it, we just have some questions about everyone's experience composting. And we have a little Zoom poll that folks should see. You could just answer the couple questions here. Have you composted before? What method have you used? And for what are you hoping to use your compost with? And yeah, we'll just give that a minute for everyone. It's hard with Zoom for it to feel like we're all face-to-face talking to each other. But hopefully this helps. All right, so that looks good. Looks like, yeah, maybe everyone can see that. Most people have composted, although many have their first time. A lot of people using city composting, which is awesome. Such a good resource. and a lot of other type of composting. So yeah, feel free to share in the chat how you've composted before, and a lot of home gardeners, which is great, because food scraps and stuff are a great input for a home compost system. So, all right, let's get into it. So first we're going to talk about what is compost. Let me get rid of this whole. So compost is the noun, the thing, the object is just decomposed organic material. It's not something by itself that we would put plants in and that they would thrive in. It's just one component of that. And composting, the verb, the action, is the process of breaking down organic matter into a valuable soil amendment, which is called humus, which is spelt like hummus, but pronounced humus. It's a naturally occurring process in the world that cycles nutrients between living and dead organisms. We mimic it on our farms and in our homes for the benefits of our soils. Any piece of organic matter can become compost, whether it's crop residue, food scraps, or even your body. Washington State passed the law last year allowing the deceased to be composted, in fact, and it's been proposed in California and Delaware as well. Cannot see anything? Are folks able to hear or see?
I can hear and see you.
Okay.
I can hear and see you too.
Same here.
I can see and hear fine. I can hear. Hopefully we can
I
fix
can see and hear.
folks who can't hear. Just, I don't know if you can point.
I can't see anything at all. It's all black with a green line. And when I hit share video or anything, it doesn't come on. I can't see anything.
Not sure. Yeah, it should be. All right, we'll continue and hopefully it will pick up for folks that aren't working. And yeah, feel free to keep us posted in the chat. So yeah, so before we go into why composting matters, it's important to know that compost is not soil. There's a difference between the two. Soil is a combination of mineral, air, water, and a smaller portion of organic matter, including microorganisms. Compost is straight organic material. This can be seen if you do a simple at-home soil experiment called the shake test, which is mostly used to check your soil composition, but you can also use it to check this out. Now my slides are over. There we go. Okay. So this is the shake test. You basically just mix up a handful of soil with water in a jar and let it settle over a couple days. The largest, heaviest particles settle down to the bottom, and then the lighter stuff settles to the top. On the bottom, you can see your sand particles, your silt, and your clay, which are the three different size mineral that soil consists of. And then on top of that, what's floating above is the organic material. Yeah, so now that we talked about what compost is, let's go into why it matters, and specifically for your garden, why it matters. One of the biggest reasons is it adds fertility by bringing nutrients back to where they're needed. A soil amended with compost releases its nutrients into soil over time, providing the plant with a steady diet and growth rate, contrary to like a fertilizer, which releases its nutrients very quickly and can lead to unstable plant growth, where it grows too fast for its own kind of structural frame to support itself. Another reason is it saves water. It helps save water by improving the soil's ability to hold water and reducing evaporation. Increasing organic matter in your soil by just 1% can hold an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre. This is the difference between soil that is able to tolerate droughts and flooding and soil that will erode or wash out more easily. It also improves soil texture and composition, allowing water and air to penetrate to the plant root areas, providing for better nutrient and water, absorption to the plant roots. And compost brings life into the soil, which are soil micro and macroorganisms. These organisms help aerate the soil, and they make the nutrients in the soil bioavailable for the plants. And they're really just super critical. There are, a little fun fact, 5 to 10 billion microbes per handful of compost. And today, most agricultural topsoils contain 1% carbon, and pre-industrial revolution, that number was 3%, and would be considered degraded in either case. By today's standards, you'd want, over 10%. Now let's talk about why compost matters for the planet. It's important on a macro level and a micro level. Today, we're facing dual social and environmental issues of food insecurity and climate change. Composting, along with other techniques in the regenerative approach of farming, can help tackle both of those issues. By composting, we're breaking down organic material high in carbon and returning it into the earth as a stable soil amendment instead of letting it decompose into the atmosphere, where it will further affect climate change. Similarly, rotting food in an anaerobic environment like a landfill releases methane, which is an even more potent greenhouse gas. Composting is generally an aerobic process, meaning oxygen is present, and in that environment, the microbes that produce the methane aren't active. Left in a landfill, these greenhouse gases enter the atmosphere where they trap heat from the sun and cause all sorts of climate issues that everyone is likely familiar with, from increased severity and frequency of extreme weather events to entire regions of the planet no longer being habitable to humans. So now let's talk about how to actually compost. There are many ways that have been developed over time. We're going to talk about 3 of them suited for homes and small farms, schools, camps, and businesses, and some of the advantages and disadvantages with each, so you can see which might be best for your context. The first way that we're going to talk about is hot composting using a 3-bin system, which some of you may have seen, which is the one on the bottom left. The second is a worm composting system using bins. And the third is letting someone else do your composting, either the city or a business. And first, we're going to talk about the 3-bin system. This is a hot compost system, meaning the pile heats up. The ingredients to make compost this way are the browns, or the carbon-rich materials, the greens, which are the nitrogen-rich materials, water, and air. And that's all the fuel that kind of makes the system work. The ratio that you want to shoot for your materials are about 30-to-1 browns to greens by weight for optimal decomposition. That said, it's hard to know the exact amount of carbon and nitrogen that you're working with. So this is a ratio that you kind of just develop a feel for through trial and error and noticing how fast things are breaking down, and just gives you a ballpark to shoot for. You don't have to be super precise with this step. Some examples of brown carbon materials would be wood shavings or prunings from plants, pine needles, straw, dried leaves, things that have kind of started decomposing a bit, dried out material. And some examples of green nitrogen materials would be like fresh cut plant matter, yard trimmings, manures, and most kitchen waste like coffee grounds or food scraps. Usually if you see wet, think nitrogen. If you see green, nitrogen. It doesn't have to actually be green and brown. That's just a helpful rule of thumb. The fuel from, after these things all combine, the fuel from the green and brown material combined with the water and air to create the hot aerobic environment that's perfect for the FBI to come in. That's the fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates that actually do the hard work of decomposing all the material into finished compost. So that's a bit about how the system works. And here's a little video talking about how to do it. We just recorded it so you can actually see the compost pile this way. And I'll just play that now. It's about 9 or 10 minutes.
So this is our 3-bin system,
To figure out how to mute
in
myself.
quotes, because it's really 2 bins. This is kind of like the first bin where you stage your kind of material for composting and things start breaking down. And this is the second bin where the breaking down continues over a couple of weeks. And then the third bin would be where you just store finished compost. And for that, we have a compost pile over here where you could, you know, you'd want to like sieve it with some kind of mesh and then store that finished compost in a bin, however you like to do it. So the first step after you have gathered your materials for composting, which we have here, are green nitrogen-rich materials, crop residue, and plant starts that we couldn't use or sell or donate, things like that. And then we have our brown materials here, our carbon-rich materials, sticks, twigs, hay, dried leaves. After we gather that, the next thing we have to do is prep it. So this woody material here, it'll break down a lot faster if we process it into smaller pieces. Like think, you know, a couple inches instead of giant twigs and sticks. You could do that a lot of ways. We'll do it using these loppers, but we've also used machetes where you just hack at it. That's a quick way to do it. Or if you've got a lot of human power, you can give everyone pruners and go to town on it. That works too. So we'll just cut this up a bit.
Somebody needs to put their phone on mute, I think.
If you have any pieces that are bigger than a pencil in diameter, they probably won't break down in the amount of time that everything else will, but they'll get sieved out at the end and they can be used as a good mulch around trees or perennials in your garden. All right, we'll call that good enough. Next thing to do is take our material and create layers, like lasagna pile of your nitrogen-rich material and your carbon material. You always want to start and end with carbon materials, your browns, so that it kind of insulates the pile, keeps it warm, and can also keep out pests that the food scraps might attract. So here we've already got like a big base of material that we've gathered and started breaking down. So we'll just add some of our nitrogen-rich stuff. Switching tools. And, you know, just want to evenly distribute it so that it breaks down evenly. And then follow the greens up with a layer of your carbon material. And after you create a layer of material, you want to add some water. The water and the oxygen from the air help fuel the whole decomposition that the fungus, bacteria, and vertebrates need to do their thing. You want to add enough water so it's kind of the wetness of a wrung out sponge. If it's too wet, you won't be it'll be an anaerobic environment, and that'll just lead to things rotting rather than breaking down in the way that we need them to. So and you want to maybe err on the side of less water than more, because you can always add more water if needed, if things aren't going as quick as you think they should be. So this is kind of set up now. You will notice over the week temperatures should start rising as the decomposition happens and the FBI party comes to life. You'll see temperatures rise to around the 140, 160 degree range, and that should be hot enough to kill a lot of plant pathogens and weed seeds, but not all weed seeds. So there's certain types of weeds that you want to avoid throwing in this compost if you don't want to propagate their seeds. But once you see that temperature rise and then drop back down, that's when you'll want to do the next part, which is mixing the pile, reincorporating everything, adding more water, adding more, if you have nitrogen-rich material like coffee grounds or manures of different kinds, you can add that in to help also speed up the decomposition at that point. So then we'd kind of move on to the second bin when it's time to, as this is all decomposing and starting to break down, this pile is a few steps ahead and looks, you know, much more broken down. This is also going through that same temperature cycle, rising and falling. So every week you should see the temperature go up and then come back down, and then you'll mix. You'll just take all the material out of your second pile here, and you can just put out a tarp or something, take it out, mix it up. I'll just demonstrate. So you dump out all your material, add your moisture, get it back to the level of a wrung out sponge. And then remix your pile and reincorporate it. So eventually you'll get to a point where this second pile starts looking like finished compost. The temperature stops rising and falling regularly. And that's when you'll know it's done. When it looks done, when everything's pretty broken down, when it kind of smells like soil. It shouldn't smell like rotting food or anything like that. It should just have that earthy smell of soil. Then it's ready to be used. And as you get to that point, you'll come back to your first bin, sort of do the same process, mixing it up and moving it over to the second bin to let it go through and restart your first bin with new material. The whole process can take about 4 to 8 weeks, depending on a lot of different factors. So just keep an eye on it and use your senses and check the temperature, and that's how you'll know when it's done.
All right.
So this is our 3-bin system.
Do that. Oh boy. Gotta restart the slides real quick.
So this is our 3-bin system.
All right, so that was a bit on how to actually do the 3-bin process. And now let's talk about who is this process for? Like, why would you use this system over a different way of composting? It's great for people who have an active garden or farm, or who otherwise have access to a lot of plant matter. It's also capable of producing a lot of compost on regular intervals, depending on your needs and your inputs. If you primarily have food scraps to compost, this technique may take longer, as it really benefits from creating a large and balanced pile of materials to keep the fungi, bacteria, and vertebrates active. So not great with food scraps. That's your primary input. Also, certain foods like meat and dairy can rot or invite pests like maggots or raccoons, which can ruin your compost pile. So consider that as well. And now let's talk about how to use it. How do we use the compost that we get from this system? This system makes compost that's great for amending a bed before planting your crop. We apply about an inch layer to the bed and sift it in using a rake or a power harrow or a tilther machine that we have. Can also be used when starting seeds by mixing it in with a potting medium to provide nutrients and boost the soil life. The chunkier bits that don't break down all the way from the woody materials, they make a great mulch for perennials and trees and shrubs. These can be sieved out at the end of the compost process and saved for later. Any questions about the 3-bin system before we go on to the next one? Looks like I see a couple in the chat. Is there a problem using treated municipal water, like from chlorine or fluoride being added? I've never had a problem with that. I'm not 100% sure, but we definitely use city water in all the composting systems I've been a part of. Can you use cat or dog manure? Not 100% sure. Manure is a super valuable input for composting systems. It's great to add manure. We used to use pigeon manure, just based on what you can access. We had someone who could supply that to us regularly. Other farm animal manure is great. Cat and dog, maybe there's a disease you'd have to be concerned with. Might check it out. Do we have?
Yeah, there was a direct question to me.
Oh, someone asked about covering the compost when it's finished and you're not using it. Yeah, great idea to cover it with a tarp or putting it in a bin or something with a lid, just so it's not getting rained on and getting, exposed to the elements too much. Someone asked about if you're in a high rain location, how do you recommend we protect from getting too wet? You can put sort of, depending on what your pile is like, some like slats of wood to kind of keep out some of the rain. You do want access to oxygen, so you don't want it to be in a closed bin. It's important that it's still exposed to the air. You can use a loose tarp and just build like a, not fully closed bin system, just a little like roof covering. And some bins have like a lid that functions that way. Or like, it's always important to put high carbon materials on the bottom and the top of the pile for that reason, for insulation. And all right, so do we need to cover the 3-bin system when it's raining? I wouldn't say you have to, especially if it's just, typical rain. If it's going to be like a heavy rain, you might want to. You can build like some sort of tarp or lid for your bins. It can be handy, but yeah, make sure it's not fully enclosed, just covering the top. But yeah, you want the pile to be, water plays an important role, but if it gets too wet, it can become anaerobic and things will stop breaking down and start rotting. All right, we'll take more questions too as we go, but let's go on to the next composting system, which is worm composting. Let's talk about composting by partnering with our friends, the worms. Vermicomposting is the sciencey name for worm composting. It's a way of creating this thick, dark, gelatinous, stable, nutrient-rich humus that soil and plants just love. At a high level, the way it works is we provide food scraps to the worms eat the scraps, and they leave behind castings or worm poop. And the worm poop is what we're looking for. It's the humus. Eisenia fetida is the worm of choice for this process. They're also known as red wigglers. Other worms, like earthworms, don't actually eat food scraps, but eat already decomposed soil. They're still a friend of the farm, but for the humus and the soil aeration they provide in the field, but not so much the worm bin. To get your hands on some red wigglers, you can order them online at places like Uncle Jim's Worm Farm, or ask for a few worms from a friend who is worm composting, and they'll reproduce in your worm bin and you'll be set. As a heads up, you might notice if you start keeping a worm bin that you'll attract some other living things in there. Most of these can actually be beneficial to the decomposition process, but some to look out for are potworms, which are like really thin little white worms. They're great decomposers if you see those. Fruit flies, they're totally harmless, but can be super annoying, if it's inside. So try to cut back on sweet, wet stuff like fruit and keep everything under a layer of shredded newspaper to deter them. Pill bugs or roly-polies, they're also harmless if you see those. Slugs and snails, those are pests. If they show up, you can just pluck them and get rid of them. Ants, you probably don't want these trailing through your place, so putting the legs of your composter in jars of water creates a barrier that will ensure they can't get to the bin. So we'll do a quick worm anatomy lesson. Worms have a mouth, a brain, they have 5 hearts, a hole for the poop to escape, a gizzard. This is where the food they eat starts to break down. They eat hard particles like sand and dirt and eggshells and rub it against the food and grind it up just like a chicken. They've got an intestine where digestive juices break down food even more and turn it into poop. And worms are also hermaphrodites. They have male and female sex organs and something called a clitellum, which is that band around their middle area that you can see, and they rub that together to reproduce. They will keep reproducing so long as they've got food. So in that way, they self-regulate their population. The population will go up if they've got a lot of food to eat and down if there's not too much. And they love to eat. They can eat the equivalent of half their weight every day, but they have somewhat specific tastes. So to talk about that, our farm manager, Pat, is gonna go through his worm bin and show everyone and explain how worm composting is done. So we've got another video.
I'm here to talk a little bit about worm bins and worm bin setup, a little bit about myself. I'm Pat, I'm the farm manager at AMI Farm and Augusta Health. I've been a hobbyist vermicomposter for the last 5 years, so I've had this bin right here for 4 years. But when you're looking for a bin setup, you can really use just about anything that's going to hold, you know, your worms or your food or what have you. Right here I have this is a Rubbermaid tub, and that's what I've used for the last 4 years. But you can also use 5-gallon buckets. Big large like troughs. I've seen people use them more like industrial scale, but for like, you know, whatever you have at home, all you need to do is make sure you have air holes drilled in the side. You can see these, they're about, I don't know, 1/8 inch drill bit. Just drill a bunch of holes in the side, and the most important part is drilling holes in the bottom. That's where all your drainage is going to take place after you add your stuff, and that's super important, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, anything can really be used as long as it's enclosed and has airflow. After you kind of have your bin setup built, you want to make sure when you place it, I'm just going to use these buckets here, you want to make sure to place it on a platform so it can drain. And you're going to want, I don't have one here, but you're going to want to put a little vessel underneath your holes to catch that drainage from it's going to leach from your vegetables or what have you put in there. So that's a little bit about how to build it. Once you have it built and established, you want to start with a little bedding. So some kind of carbon source, whether it be wood chips, sawdust, straw. You want to lay like at least 1 inch down on initially, and then start mixing in like your food scraps or what have you. And after a week or so of doing that and letting stuff really compost down, you can then add your worms. So yeah, going back on that, what to add? Throughout the years, I've pretty much added everything except meat and poultry. That's kind of a no-no for the bin, mostly because it's going to stink really bad. But you can add just about any vegetable scraps. Let's just take a look. What do I got in here? We got eggshells. Eggshells can be added. It's hard though. See how that's not crunched up? If you're going to add your eggshells and you want them to break down faster, you're going to want to really crunch up your eggshells. This is the corn cob that's breaking down. What else we got in here? An oyster shell. I don't think that's going to break down, but that's from my old days of just trying all that stuff. This is all like a lot of worm castings in here, so trying to get something here to eggshells. I mean, I think this is a petrified potato. Cool. So you can add, like I said, you can add any household scrap, any produce from your kitchen, pretty much. Citrus is said not to add, but worms just don't like things acidic. So once that citrus peel, like orange or lemon, starts breaking down after 2 weeks, they will eat it. Yeah. So yeah, you can also add like manure of sorts if you're like a farmer. You can compost your like horse poop or your cow poop or your dog poop. You know, you can put that in there too. They'll eat. Worms will eat just about anything. but most commonly it's used for like household scraps. Another common question is like, okay, you got your bin, you got your setup, you've been adding your scraps from your kitchen. And the note on adding your stuff, you want to add carbon material with that. So you want to add like sawdust or like wood chips, or actually maybe not even wood chips, it's a little thicker. You want a finer carbon like straw or sawdust. That's gonna like help, it's gonna break down faster than a wood chip would. Granted, wood chips would be okay. It's just gonna kind of take a longer time to break down. So the ratio I add to that is like if I dump like a, I don't know, if you can imagine a kitchen compost, like a silver, if you guys know what I'm talking, like a silver, you guys know what I'm talking about, like you're here with me. A silver bin, you add that, and then you I would sprinkle like a couple handfuls of your carbon, your sawdust on top of it, and then mix it around in your soil. So you want to get your worms on top of it. And I'm a very hands-on composter, so I'll get in there and just like feel around. If things are feeling wet, if they're feeling, I'm gonna add more carbon. You don't want wet, you don't want dry. You want a really smooth, like middle ground of that. So if it's too wet, I'll add more sawdust and like mix it around. If it's too dry, I'll water it a bit. So it's not, you just gotta, it's more of it's a lot of intuition on top of that. So that's adding. So harvesting, when you get your bin full, like if you want to scan here, this is a decent size. We'd have a pretty good amount of vermicompost. The way I like to harvest, people can, there are a few different ways, but my preference is on this scale is just to start feeding your worms on one side. So on the right side here, on my right, I'll start feeding them for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long. And the worms will all just migrate over to that side, or most of them will. They'll migrate over, start eating. They're gonna go where the food is. So then once like 2 or 3 weeks go by and you look at that left side, it should be pretty fairly broken down. And the worms, for the most part, should have migrated, and you take the compost out of there. And if you want to harvest the other side, start feeding it on the harvested side. You can also do like Passover bins, so like you can have holes drilled in another or pass-through bin, another Rubbermaid tub that sits in here with holes in it, and you do the same process, lay the bedding, drill the holes, start feeding it, and then put it in this bin, and the worms will go up through into the next bin. So there's a few different ways to harvest. Yeah, so a little bit of troubleshooting, as I mentioned earlier, about too wet or too dry. There's a few things to look for when it's too wet. Your worms are going to want to leave your bin if it's really wet. They're going to like try to escape. They'll be all over the sides, all over the walls. It's a good rule. It's probably too wet in there, so you're going to want to add more carbon for that. If it's too dry, again, I would just add a little bit of water. I would err on the side of not adding too much though, because mostly it's going to be too wet. If I'd assume if it's going to be household scraps. Which I'm assuming it's mostly going to be. It's going to be too wet most of the time. But if it is too dry, just add a little water, and that'll help. That'll help your worms out. Worms escaping, as I mentioned. That's typically a sign of it too dry or too wet. Sorry. And another common problem is other bugs, like black soldier fly larvae, fruit flies, stuff like that get in my bin. Again, that's kind of like the ratio of like what you're adding. So if you're adding stuff like, if you're adding like meat and things like that, the worms will probably eat it eventually, but like you're just gonna attract a lot of other bugs with that. So that's kind of where you want to steer away from. If you see other bugs, it's probably something you added. Just take notes and try to like, try to figure out what you added, what you didn't add. And like I said, most things that we add are gonna be fine from the kitchen. Stay away from those meat products. And if it stinks, that's another common one. If you like smell, you come down your basement or wherever you have your worm bin. If you have a stench that's just like, man, this smells off. It's gonna be a ratio of not enough carbon and nitrogen. So you're probably too much nitrogen in there. You're gonna want to add a lot of carbon. Mix it around. Get things back in order again. If you don't want to use your hands and get in there with your worm bin, just use a trowel or something or a shovel and move it to another bin. Mix it around. There are ways around it. But it's gonna be a ratio of your carbon to nitrogen that's gonna cause the stench. Yeah, and I guess that's all we have in terms of how I've done it in the past. Yeah, it's been a fun experiment through the years. I think something else that I often get asked too is how often do you feed them? And I would say once a week during the summer is gonna be plenty. Kind of just like you have to go and check on them, make sure kind of see if they're eating the food or not. That'll be another reason for them to escape if you aren't feeding them enough. So if it's like 2-3 weeks you haven't fed them, they're gonna want to try to get out because there's no food there. But once a week during the summer, during the hotter months, because they're more active during the warmer months, and they're not so active in the winter. So when it's cooler outside, they're said to die at 32 degrees or less. However, I have overwintered worms in my compost pile outside. So I've taken some of these worms, put in my home compost bin that Dylan had just talked about, and they exploded in there, and it's its own separate bin. So yeah, and then practical uses for the worms. We do here you can harvest, just add it to any house plant, add it to your garden. Very beneficial for your garden. I know Dylan had talked about it, or it's in the slides. We also do compost teas here. So we brew essentially a tea and we apply it to our soil and our plants. So that just enhances microbiology in our soil, microbiology in our plants, and therefore microbiology in ourselves. So yeah, that's all I got. I'm here to talk.
All right. So thanks, Pat, for walking us through how to use the worm bin. Now let's talk a little bit about who this system is kind of best for. One of the coolest things about worm composting is that unlike something like the 3-bin system, which takes a fair bit of room and work and materials, worm composting is doable in pretty small spaces, outdoors or even indoors. I know someone who's had a worm compost bin in her dining room for years, and it's totally inconspicuous, and it's not gross or anything. Another great part of worm composting is kids love to get involved with it and explore what's going on inside the worm bin. It can be really tactile. It can be fascinating to see what all the decomposers are up to, and watches what was food waste turns into compost. Also, if you're a compost tea user, you'll want to go the worm bin route, since worm castings are an important ingredient for teas usually. And how to use worm compost. Compost teas are one of the most common ways to use worm castings. This could be a workshop in itself with all the different ways and uses of compost teas, but the basic idea is steeping the castings in water over 12 to 24 hours and then applying the tea to your crops. You're just using some kind of container to hold your compost in water, like you're brewing a pot of tea. The leftover castings can be used as a potting mix amendment. Using compost tea is a great way to boost microbiological activity in the soil by adding bacteria and fungi, actinomycetes, and protozoa, which are soil microorganisms that just help break things down in the soil and make nutrients available to the plants and make the whole soil food web run. The humus can also be used just like hot compost. You can apply it in a thin layer to your garden bed and rake it in before planting. The nutrients will sink into the soil as you water or as it rains. Does anyone have any questions about worm composting before we go on? Looks like I see a couple. Can shredded paper be used in place of sawdust? Yeah, shredded paper, to my knowledge, is a great, makes great bedding for worms. You can dampen it a little bit, not so it's wet, just like a wrung out sponge. Pat, I think, is also available to answer questions potentially on the Zoom. If you put your bin legs in water, how do you keep the mosquitoes at bay? Good question. I've never run into the mosquito problem, but maybe changing the water out and not using too much, just, some jars, creating a little barrier there. Like if your bin is on legs, like Pat is his bin is just one like storage bin, but they often also have thin legs that you can put in little jars of water.
Yeah, Dylan, I just want to jump in quick on the compost tea discussion. Just want to make clear that the compost tea, when things drain in your bottom of your bin and they drain into into a bucket or vessel, that is not tea. That is actually like leachate, and it's not good for your plants or your soil. You also want to discard that. Compost tea is brewed. You take the castings, you mix. I'm sure Dylan, yeah, we just talked about it a bit, but take the castings and you kind of make a tea. Like I said, Dylan said it quick. It'd be a longer discussion to have, but I just wanted to say that what's going into your bottom of your bin from the veggies is not compost tea. That's not a good thing to add. So.
Yep, thank you. There's someone asking how to microbrew compost tea. We're kind of running short on time, so we don't have a ton of time to go into it, but maybe if you want to add anything else, Pat, about how we brew the tea here quickly. Yeah.
Sure. Quick ideas. We usually take a cup of vermicompost. We have aeration. We use an aerated. You can use a bubbler, and we use a 5-gallon bucket, and then we use like a sugar, like molasses. And there's a lot of teas you can make it things for everything, but that's just our basic one, and we'll brew it. It's like it's aerated for 24 hours, and then we apply it. So that's quick and dirty of it.
Yeah. There's also, tons of information online. Definitely, if you Google compost tea making, lots of great info to come up, and maybe we'll do a compost tea workshop down the line. That could be fun. Someone asks, is the humus leftover debris from compost tea? The humus is the compost that you're harvesting from the worm bin and you're using to make the tea. And, that leftover stuff, when you're made the tea, that's also the humus, although it'll be a little bit, drained of nutrients probably at that point, but you can still use it as compost. All right, so let's go on to our third and final way of composting, which is the municipal or commercial composting. Covered the 3-bin system and the worm composting. Where I used to live in San Francisco, we generate about 1 football field of garbage for 6 million pounds every day. That is an absolute ton of waste. Someone pointed out to me that that's actually 3,000 tons of waste. And 35% of it is actually compostable, meaning it could be being turned into this valuable soil amendment instead of just generating greenhouse gases in landfills. Another great composting option that can help with this shortcoming of our waste management systems is to let someone else do your composting for you. San Francisco and other cities actually collect compostable materials curbside now, along with trash and recycling. There will be a 3rd green bin. And it's become very profitable for waste management companies who sell out, every season to vineyards and farms that are seeking lots of compost. Here where we are in Virginia, I've heard of discussions happening with the state around composting processes. So hopefully we'll have something like that one day here. Near Augusta County, Virginia, there's a business called Black Bear Composting that offers commercial and residential pickup service. So for a small fee, they provide all the materials needed, like a collection bin for outside and compostable bags for inside, and a few different options for businesses and homes, depending on how much waste you're generating. They'll come and collect your compost curbside, and they'll bring you finished compost to use or donate to others if you don't need it, monthly or also in lump sums. They've got a few different options depending on your needs. So good place to check out Black Bear. Another option that's region specific is farmers markets. Lots of farmers markets offer compost collection sites, including here, the Stanton Farmers Market. One thing to note is composting and recycling this way can be really confusing initially. A lot of the materials are labeled and designed to look green and eco, but they're actually not recyclable or compostable. Specific waste management facilities can also only handle specific materials. Like not all recyclers can handle thin film plastic like these bags, and not all composters can break down greenware like these plastic, I mean, they're not plastic, but these, you know, bioplastic utensils that are made from soy and corn. They often don't break down in commercial composting systems. These services are still great options that provide an awesome service, but it's important to check with your waste management provider, see what their requirements are. It's also worth considering the most impactful waste management strategy, which is to just use less. Reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost is the mantra. And the first line of defense against waste is always reducing what we use if possible. Also, when it comes time to compost food that's still perfectly edible, it's worth thinking about if there are people or animals who would benefit from having that food. Could it be donated to a food pantry or fed to some farm animals? Although composting is hugely important, the end goal is to feed people. That was a quick run through of some commercial composting. Does anyone have any questions about that system? Great. Well, that's how to compost in a nutshell. If you'd like, you could let everyone know in the chat how you're planning on using this information, composting, what your goals are, any takeaways, share some info about it. And here's some takeaways that I hope you all got from the talk. You know, you can choose the right system. There's a lot of different ways to compost, and choose the one that's right for you. The 3-bin, lots of crop residue or lawn trimmings. Worms, you got food scraps, great system. Kids, you're using Compost Teas, educational setting. Commercial, low time commitment. Businesses can also use this if you've got a business that you'd like to have a commercial pickup, want to reduce your carbon footprint, and just experiment and have fun. The easiest way to learn is by doing. You're gonna quickly see what your worms are eating in the bin or how fast your 3-bin system's breaking down to finish compost, and iterate from there. Compost and composting is just super beneficial for the soil and the planet and our health. So I hope everyone enjoys digging into it. And let's see, got another minute or so for some questions. So thank you, everyone. And yeah, if anyone has any more questions, take a look in the chat. Looks like someone sent some helpful info on handling mosquitoes, teaspoon of dish soap plus a gallon of water to kill mosquito larvae. Thank you for that.
Will you send us a copy of the presentation?
I believe these go on our YouTube channel. Yeah, on the Allegheny Mountain Institute YouTube channel.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
In the coming week. And if we can, yeah, we'll send out a link to the Zoom people who registered. Seems to take forever to turn in compost. Yeah, I see a question asking about the speed of the composting happening. The 3-foot square container with a lid that has holes takes forever. Yeah, it could be a lot of factors. It depends, your ratios of carbon to nitrogen. You might want to add more nitrogen-rich material. And definitely the way to kind of iterate that, get it going quicker, to see what the problems could be. You want to monitor the temperature, you can, if you have a thermometer or something, or just visually, check with your hand. It should be getting pretty hot after the day after you add your materials. Over the next week, it should be getting hot and then coming back down. If it's not heating up, then yeah, you should look into adding some nitrogen-rich material perhaps, or giving it a mix and a wet. Give it some water. You want it to be as wet as a wrung-out sponge. But yeah, definitely with the hot compost system, you want to be turning it when it cools down. That helps aerate everything and get the bacteria and fungi and invertebrates going again. Yeah, you don't want it to dry out either. A lot of people excited to start composting, which is awesome. Yeah, you can do it in your apartment. It's pretty cool. Worms rule. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, I'll be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow, and it will have that link to the recording that will be on our YouTube channel. So you can go back and reference that at any point. Also, please check out our website for future workshops, events, and donations. Our workshops are free and open to the public. Donations and community support make this possible. If you are able, please consider making a donation on our website, amifellows.org, and we hope to see you at future workshops. Thank you.